Every voice matters. Blue Lift is a podcast dedicated to address the issues that affect all of us, with engaging discussions with progressive thought leaders and experts as guests. Here's your host, Peggy Kingsbury.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Blue Lift. Hey, I have to tell you, I was out around town this week in a couple of places, and two different people approached me and said they'd been listening to the podcast and really enjoyed it, and they mentioned several episodes. So I really like that. So if you see me out and about and you want to say something about the pod, I'd love it. Also, if you want to send emails about guests or criticisms, whatever's on your mind, the email's in the show notes. You can certainly use that for that. And I just need to let you know that we are in Middle Tennessee, and everything on God's beautiful green earth is blooming right now. So if you hear some sneezes and sniffles, it's just allergies, and everybody around here has them. So we may have to deal with that today. I am so excited about my guest today. I have Marianne Richmond with us. She's my friend. We play a little pickleball together. She plays. I kind of mess around on the pickleball court and try to hit it occasionally. Marianne has a new book that's just been released, and I'm going to hold that up for you in a minute. But of course, she's one of these women who has just done so many interesting things in life, and I love her professional story because it shows ups and downs, highs and lows, wonderful, wonderful times of rediscovering herself and the people around her. Actually, Marianne went through some medical situations and ended up having to have brain surgery, which luckily was very successful in what it was trying to do. But while she was recovering, that's when she decided to take up writing more in a professional way and wrote her first book. She is an artist, an illustrator. She's owned a company with lots of employees. She publishes children's books and the book that we're going to discuss some today. And she just, like a lot of women, just decided, you know what? I really hadn't done enough yet. Let me just go get a master's degree in clinical mental health. Why not? So she's raised her wonderful children, and now she just decided to go get a master's degree. So that's the kind of gal that Marianne is, and we love those kind of women because, they realize that the decades pass and you've got to sort of learn new things and try to help different people in different ways. So welcome, Marianne Richmond.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that introduction. It does make it sound rather absurd to decide to go back to school.
Yes, it's not absurd, though. It's brave. That's what it is. It takes courage, doesn't it?
Thank you. It did, yes. Yes, and the experience was so satisfying. There was something I really enjoyed about learning, frankly. That's what brought me into it. I was craving some new learning. I've been an author and artist for 3 decades, and I know this industry, publishing industry, backwards and forwards. And I was just craving some new learning, some ways to expand my mind and understanding of, I've been passionate about storytelling for a long time, but I really wanted to understand more deeply how the brain and body hold on to stories, how our nervous system is impacted by the stories that we're living. And I definitely got that out of it. So it was really expansive, and just being in a classroom and getting to be friends with other people who were going along for the ride. And
it's fun. It's fun to be with younger students too. I got a master's degree after 40, and I found that I learned a lot from the younger students and their perspective on things. But I also, forged a couple of friendships I still have today, and the younger students appreciated those of us who were a little more experienced in the class because we have a different perspective. Yeah. So I really love that when the classroom is made up of different generations like that. It's great.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was so impressed and amazed at some of the younger women who were doing it with babies, toddlers, because part of the internship program for the counseling degree was, collecting 1,000 hours of face-to-face counseling.
Oh, that's a
And
lot.
I thought, how the heck are they doing this with
Yeah.
toddler? Yeah. So, wow, I was amazed.
Yeah. Well, I know from your book, you went through a period of time where you had little kids, you were running a company, you were also the creator of the
Yeah,
company, and so you had a lot on your plate for sure.
I know. And I do think back to that, and I thought, yeah, people were probably looking at me that same way. And I remember just thinking, yeah, you take it day by day and minute by minute, and that was the strategy.
Yeah.
Nothing more
Yeah. Yeah.
complicated than that. Yeah.
Well, I want to start by first of all, I mean, a lot of the things we're going to talk about today are springboard from your latest book, and it's titled "If You Were My Daughter," and I'm going to hold that up for everyone so they can see it. I've got Post-it notes all in it. It doesn't come like that. I put those there.
Wouldn't that be interesting?
Yeah, so
Situation.
that would be well, that's sometimes when I read books on my Kindle app, people they let you know if people have marked certain passages and how much they've marked it, and I always find that rather interesting. Like and occasionally I'll be like, I can see why people are marking this sentence because it's really memorable. But so I put the Post-it notes in there. But this book is available everywhere you get books. If you're in the Nashville area, or really in any area, head out to an independent bookseller and get that. And in Nashville, Parnassus, which I think is where you had your launch, and so
Yeah.
so that would be great.
Yeah, and they still have signed copies there. So I left a bunch
Oh, okay.
behind.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Hold on one second. I apologize. The next guest is lost and trying to find the place. So, yeah, it is. So that is good. And I was actually at an event last night where Parnassus was present. I went to the launch of Melinda French Gates.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and latest book. And I would love to have her as a guest. I don't see that happening, but I would love to do that. But she was great because, of course, Ann Patchett interviewed her. And, that's the second book launch I've seen for Melinda French Gates, where she's been interviewed by Ann Patchett. And so I love that you had your book launch there, and that shows how respected you are as an author, because not just everybody gets to have a book launch at Parnassus.
Yeah, they do it so well there.
Yes.
They have it down. And yes, they are so responsive and supportive of local authors. So I really appreciate them.
And our independently owned bookstores are real treasures. They truly are.
Yes.
One of the things I think that really sucked me into your book right away, and I'm sure that you wrote it this way, was this medical drama. and I was just like, what is it she's got? What is it she's got? I really want to know. And I thought about thumbing through the pages ahead because I don't like secrets. Your medical journey started when you were a child, and you had a seizure. How old were you when that happened?
I was 9. I was 9 years old. Mm-hmm.
And how frightening. I mean, you write it so well that I'm almost in the room with you, feeling it.
It is so memorable, even to this day. And you say it was a seizure. It was a seizure, but it took a long time to know that's what it was. So when it happened, it was the best way I can describe it for your listeners is almost that feeling of if you would knock your elbow against something and there's that vibrating feeling.
Yeah, in your fingers.
Yes, and that feeling would start in my hand, and then it would start pulsing and go up my arm, and then turn into a generalized seizure where I would then go unconscious and my body would seize and convulse. And I started the book with that first, what do you call it? Well, seizure. But I started there because it felt like the delineation of my life into a before and an after. Up until that moment, I would have described myself as a pretty quote unquote normal kid. I was in brownies and took piano lessons and all the things. And then this happened. And it was as if I became a different little girl. I was so, so terrified. And from that moment on, lived in consistent fight or flight, hypervigilance of what is this? When's it going to happen again? Because no one would tell me or was able to tell me what was wrong with me.
Well, and I believe that is the topic that came out to me the most, is that you were not being listened to, or you were certainly were not being heard by the adults around you, and that included your mother. Which is really the impetus for the book. But that included your mother and certainly the doctor. And I think, a lot of that was your age, and then the fact that you were female. One wonders if a little boy had gone through the same thing, how would he have been treated about it? Because this was back, I guess, what year would this have been? Like,
yeah, it all started mid-70s, so it was like 75 or something like that.
So, so, women, right, they say women have hysteria, and it was sort of that sort of feeling I was getting from reading the words about how you were being treated at the doctor and how that was.
And you say women, this is a child.
Well, it's true.
I mean, look at a 9-year-old little girl. Like, look at any fourth grader. They are small, they are little, they are children. And so it was a parade of doctors saying, well, the first one told me this is just laughable if it wasn't so awful. It told me I had a pinched nerve. And that was causing full body convulsions. And then the second guy, who was, there was a family doctor, but also a neurologist, who at the time was known as Milwaukee's leading neurologist, told me I had a conversion disorder, which, again, for your listeners, is a way of saying that it's my psychological doing manifesting as physical symptoms. Basically, it's your problem. You are causing this. You are stressed, you are causing this.
Right.
And at 9, hearing this, it was like I was screaming in my body, like, no, I am not. Why won't anyone believe me? It was so frustrating.
And I took two things away from that part of the story. One is your frustration, and I was very angry, when I read what this particular doctor had said. And two, also having had a mother who was, let's just say, disassociated from me in many ways. When I read that, I thought, wow, if a mom takes their child to the doctor and the doctor says this, that the child, is showing stress and concern, because she feels like she's not being seen and cared for, wouldn't a mother then just really latch on and say, wow, I need to love her better, and I need to be there for her more? And your mom didn't do that.
My mom did not do that. And if you read the book jacket on the back, there's a line that I wrote, that how the stories that we are born into shape the ones we tell about ourselves.
So true.
And I specifically came to that because that is exactly what happened. So if you went back 10 years from when I arrived on this planet, my mom was in the Air Force, and which was very unusual for a woman back then to be in the Air Force. Oh,
absolutely. And she made captain, is that right?
She was captain,
wow.
Right? And she was struggling for a myriad of reasons and diagnosed with depression. And the remedy at that time for this doctor was to ship her off to Walter Reed medical hospital in Washington, D.C., and they put her through electroshock therapy, which was her own trauma. And let's just camp on the word trauma for a second. Through my mental health counseling journey, there was a therapist who described trauma as overwhelming helplessness. Trauma is overwhelming helplessness.
Mm.
And I love that definition. That felt like a light bulb moment for me to see that my experience and my journey was trauma. Whether it's your body doing something that you are helpless, or you're watching your house burn down, or you're being sexually abused, it is overwhelming helplessness. And my mom was experiencing overwhelming helplessness by being strapped to a table and having electricity shot through her body to supposedly oust depression.
And she had like 15 of those treatments, right?
Right. So then drop me into the story, and she is now a wife and a mother, two roles that she really didn't want. And that's a whole other story of how she ended up as a wife and a mother, of kind of feeling like, well, I guess I'm not sure what else to do, so I think I'll do this. And was very anti-medical community, very doctor averse because of her situation. So taking me to doctors was not her first desire. So then that led to, well, we're going to pray. We're going to try prayer. And then I'm going to take you to homeopathists and chiropractors who had all sorts of ideas about what was wrong with me as well. So it was just a wild goose chase for me, of all these people giving me their opinions of what was wrong with me. Meanwhile, I knew, because that part in the book where a kid in my class had a seizure next to me in 7th grade. So now let's fast forward, and I'm 12. And there's a boy in my class who has an epileptic seizure next to me. His mom, we knew it was epilepsy because his mom would come in the classroom and instruct all of us little kids that if Ron had a seizure, do not worry, this is what's happening, et cetera, even though it was still terrifying. I went running home from school and told my mom that I had figured it out. Screw all these doctors. I know what I have. I have epilepsy. I'm sure of it. And she completely dismissed me, told me it was my diet, and that we were going to work on that.
Mm.
And the word epilepsy was never mentioned again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then just to kind of fast forward a little bit, because I don't want to leave the listeners hanging too much, but I also want them to get the book to get the full story. So we are we're leaving some really interesting tidbits out. So just so you think we're telling it all, we're not. But fast forward. And how old were you when you had the CAT scan that eventually revealed what was going on?
That was 24-ish. Yeah. Yeah.
So you went 15, a long time afraid that a seizure was going to hit at any moment. Every little tinge in your fingers, I'm sure, would send you into a panic.
Oh gosh, yes. Yes.
And then
yes, it was awful.
And you, as far as I can tell from reading the book, and I think I'm remembering this correct, you did not send the letter to the original doctor that you wrote to him, right?
I sent, you mean back to the doctor who
said that it was all in your head and you were doing it to yourself, etc. Oh, you did send him the letter.
Yes, I did.
Good for you. Good for you. Because, so for the listeners, she finally, Marianne finally finds out that she actually has a brain tumor, and she writes to this original doctor and tells him off. And I love it. And I'm not sure that the medical community is still geared to really listen to children like they should. In fact, I interviewed Dr. Michelle Fiscus, and I think that's something that she and I talked about. And I've I've had other people in the medical community tell me that one of the things that they don't talk about enough in medical school is that, you know, many times as you become a bit of an older child, you see a physician who mainly treats adults. So you might see a neurologist who mainly treats adults if there's not a childhood neurologist around. And they specifically, not just those neurologists, but any doctor who mainly treats adults, but then has a young person, a child in for the area that they're a specialist in, may have very little training in how to listen and differentiate children and what they're saying. And actually, I'm kind of remembering now the guest I had on where we talked about that was Janet Schaus, and she works with a lot with autistic adults. But she also said in medical school they don't get a lot of training about how to deal with someone who perhaps has autism and also medical things. So it's sort of the listening thing is missing. And I do think women. I think two things happen there. We get dismissed, but we also don't really stand up for ourselves at the doctor's office like we should.
Oh, completely. Yeah, there's so much there, and the parade of doctors, that I sat in front of, and I definitely got more bold, the older I got to say, I don't like what I'm hearing,
Yeah.
so send me somewhere. Yeah, I mean, there was a doctor along the way who, yes, there was a lesion. They were calling it a lesion in my brain because they didn't know exactly what it was. All they could see was that there was a dark spot, if you will. And so, I had one neurologist say, well, let's just check on it. Let's just give you an MRI every 6 months and see what it's doing. I was like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not really a fan of that. I don't want to wait and see if this mass in my brain does something. So then it was like, send me somewhere else. And that's how I ended up getting to the Yale New Haven hospital and they had a whole epilepsy surgery center up there.
Oh,
It was,
wow.
it's like one of few in the world. So ultimately, after a very, very, very long journey, I ended up with amazing care. But it was all through my own tenacity and not because of the support of a caring grown-up, i.e., either my mom or dad. I was really, really on my own to figure this mystery out.
And when you told your parents what you had discovered and that you now knew what was causing the seizures, how did they react?
Oh gosh, that scene is in the book where I tell my mom, I'm going to have brain surgery. And she says, quote unquote, it was, well, I'm going to bring that to my Bible study and we're going to pray for a miracle so that you don't need surgery. That was her response.
So there was no recognition on her part that your plea for help for all these years had been unnoticed.
No, there was never any accountability, any circling back to talk about anything, really. Yeah, none of that. And yeah, another mentor who came along for me, Kelly McDaniel, and she endorsed my book. She wrote her own book called Mother Hunger. And that is a term she coined for adult daughters, mostly daughters, lacking nurturing, guidance, and protection. She's named those three things. And the lack of those things, she's coined Mother Hunger. And she said to me over a phone call after reading my memoir, she says, Marianne, we heal by being witnessed. And that witnessing is what allows trauma to become resilience. That if we have trauma and we have a loving, caring witness journeying with us, can be a mother, it can be a father, it can be a beloved teacher, aunt, somebody. to shepherd us through the process. We can turn that trauma into resilience and healing. Without that witness, that's where we end up with anxiety, depression, PTSD, unhealed trauma. And it is the difference between having a witness or not.
Hmm.
And I did not have an advocate. I did not have a witness through this whole journey, which is why it ended up with such a deep struggle for me.
Well, it's really interesting that you say that, because I feel very strongly as you were speaking those words that you are a witness for others by writing this book. I felt very seen when I read it, because I did have a mother who didn't do those things. And so you are serving now as a witness for many people, because in our culture it doesn't seem oftentimes okay to say my mother sucked. She just wasn't any good at it. It doesn't seem appropriate to say that, but you're saying to people it's all right to say that.
Yes, I had a girlfriend who was very put off by hearing me share my story. And she says, you act like, can I swear here?
Oh, yes, you can. Hell yeah.
Okay. She said, you act like you had a shitty mom. And I said, well, I did.
Yeah.
She
exactly.
wasn't great. And when I picked the subtitle of the book, Healing an Unmothered Heart, I specifically put unmothered heart because I wasn't unmothered, period. I had food, I had shelter. Someone said I had the left brain things covered, but nothing of the right brain emotional. And I thought, oh, I like that.
Yeah.
That is so true.
Yeah. Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't go hungry, but my father was an alcoholic. My mother was bipolar, and depressed and a lot of other things, and abused substances as well. And so, there were times when I wasn't sure the rent was going to be paid, and they would send me with the rent check because they knew the landlord wouldn't yell at a kid, but I knew I was making that walk of shame every time.
Walk of shame.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like, it is embarrassing to be me right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that this book is a witness. And I wrote that very thing in the letter to the reader, that is my hope for this book. And what I realized 30 years after writing for children is that all my children's books are their own witnesses to people's journeys. I have a book called Be Brave, Little One, which feels like a memoir for children.
Can you hold that up? Do you have a copy handy?
Yes, I do have it. Yep.
There we go. I love. And did you do all your own artwork?
I did.
Of course, it's beautiful. Be brave, little one.
And it talks about how far will I go? What things can I be when I get to choose what brave is to me? And that bravery looks different for everybody. And this book has found its way into so many families to come alongside their stories, especially kids with health challenges, which is just such a sweet full circle. Kids with health challenges, babies in the NICU unit. It's become a bit of a rally cry for those little sweet babies. And people will write to me and say, how did you know how I felt? And it's like, well, because I feel those things too. Our stories are different, but our feelings are a lot the same.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you read that passage, because that's one of my Post-it notes. I put a note on the page in your book where you quote from your children's book, and I'll just read it for the listeners again. It says, "Be brave to begin to listen inside to the voice of your heart, so truthful and wise. How far can I go? What things can I be when I get to choose what brave is to me?" And I love that. I love that because you're right. Of course, you're right. Our bravery shows up in different ways, and I love so many parts of the book, but your journey in business also interests me too, because
Yes.
I'm an entrepreneur as well. But I mean, you lived through the saga of owning a very successful business, responsible for other people's income, which I am as well in my other life, and that's hard.
Yeah.
That's weighty on your shoulders when you think every decision I
Oh,
make puts food on their table, and then things
yeah.
sort of fell apart in that business, and that must have been very difficult to go through. Very difficult.
Well, thank you for recognizing that, because that certainly was another example of overwhelming helplessness, of losing a business that, for your listeners, it's the leap from me. We kind of went to the physical healing of brain surgery, and out of that surgery, it was as simple as being bald and bored, is what I say. It wasn't like I had this long hidden desire to be a writer, like nothing like that. It was more, okay, I've got 10 hours a day to fill because I can't work. I just have to chill out and let my brain rest. What am I going to do all day? Like TV is getting old. And so I started hand painting thank you cards for people because that took a lot of time. I was like, well, I'm just going to personalize everyone for all these people who had given me gifts and stuff in the hospital. And out of that, I had wrote this very short little story for, it was called The Gift of an Angel. And it was this fictitious story of how God picks out a guardian angel and sends the angel to earth with her instructions of how to be a good angel. And it was really a metaphor for what I believe we all have, these earth angels, people who come alongside us. And I shared that story with a friend, and he encouraged me to publish it. I was like, well, I don't know how to do that. And so again, I figured it out, and all of a sudden I had a book. And I started hand selling this one book of mine to anybody. I would walk into bookstores, I'd walk into gift shops, you want to buy my book? And somehow I ended up selling thousands of these. And so one book became two, five, and then, for your listeners, this grew into a publishing company that my husband and I ran. We were creating everything. I was writing everything. We went from one employee to like probably 12 in the end. And we got through the Great Recession of 2008. We made it through that. And then in 2010, the wheels started falling off the cart. And it was a confluence of things. Banks were rescinding their credit to businesses. And at the same time, we had over $250,000 worth of books in Walmart. And they decided to return them all because they can't. On a whim, they can say, oh, this isn't selling. Send them all back to the or the publisher. And you don't have any recourse on that. You'll just get a truck at your door and all your books come back. Well, we were already on the hook for the printing of all those books.
Right.
I honestly can say our business ended, a 16-year business ended on a Tuesday morning. It was like that sudden, where we got all this product returned on the same day the bank decided to rescind their credit line to our business because they were calling back their loans because of the economic crisis.
Yeah.
Well, that was the money that was paying people, and you borrow, you pay it back, you borrow, you pay it back.
Right.
And that was the life of a small business.
Ooh.
And so that one domino led to financial fallout, physical, emotional fallout. It was almost like a seizure of a different kind, like a life seizure. Like everything that brought me stability was precarious or going away. And it was super difficult. Difficult.
I love the way the book lays out the ups and downs of life, and the fact that you have this amazing inner strength and ability to get up and figure things out, and your marriage remained intact.
Yeah, it's a number of people have been shocked by that. Like,
Yeah. I mean, a lot of
like how?
families, any one little thing and the marriage falls apart, but you all went through some stuff and
We
your
did.
marriage remained intact.
It did. It was rough for a while. I blamed my husband for so much, unfairly, I admit, but in my own state of helplessness, I wanted to pin it on somebody. It had to
Right.
be somebody's fault. And because he was the one in charge of the financial part of our business, he was the likely guy, Yeah. So that was a lot of therapy for me to understand, well, how are we co-creating our realities? It's
Hmm.
never one person's. And some of the aftermath of my journey of being, well, gaslit for so long. I mean, you talk about medical gaslighting now, it
Oh,
has a name. But the cumulative effects of not being believed, not having that mothering figure, the concept of trusting myself was just broken. I didn't even know what that meant. I was
hmm.
just living, like I said, on in anxious all the time that I didn't know what it meant to trust myself because when I thought I knew, I was talked out of that.
Right, right.
So like, well, okay, oh, all right. I thought that's what it felt like, but apparently not, because
Hmm.
these people who are more powerful than me seem to know the answer. So that was something that I really started seeing of what does it look like to move back into a place of self-trust? How do you do that? What is the healing that allows you to reconnect with your own knowing? And that was my journey of figuring that out with a therapist who taught me all sorts of things about connecting with our body wisdom and our emotional uh, language, like getting to know the vocabulary of my own soul, if you will.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Well, it's
yeah.
interesting that you say that because when I read the story, I understand what you're saying, but what I see is a person who really should always trust herself because you went through some real stuff and you survived
Oh,
it
thank
all.
you for
And
saying that.
you didn't just survive it, but you used your gift of creativity then to share that and in ways that I mean, I just love the children's books. I mean, that just the fact that you're writing these children's books is so important. And um, it's interesting when I was at the event last night with Ann Patchett, she actually pulled up a children's book and read a passage of that
Oh,
book. And I think that's where that was. Anyway, I was somewhere recently and an adult read a children's book. And I thought, oh, how fascinating
she,
that is because um, children's books obviously are written for children, but so often they have a wonderful message,
oh
for
goodness, yes.
us. And when you write your children's books, are you speaking specifically to children or are you thinking about an overarching concept and making it so that
Mhm.
children can understand it? How does that work?
I think it's a little more the latter. I came into the writing of children's books again almost by accident, and it's not because I love children, which is like people are like, "Ugh." Of course, I love my children. I want to uplift children. I want to instill in them a secure place within themselves. That's what I love. But it wasn't that that brought me to children's writing. What did was experiencing my own things and wanting to be that witness again. Because
Hmm.
my very first book, The Gift of an Angel, I wrote long before I had children.
Hmm.
And yet I packaged it in a children's book because it felt accessible that way.
Hmm.
So often I will be circling around a bigger theme that I hear people expressing a lot. So a lot of how I create is I start listening for the universal that I hear everybody saying. And there's an equation in the writing world called this is a story of X as told through Y. And so when people are writing memoir or really anything, I invite them to think about how their story fits that equation. So you would say, like, this is a story of forgiveness as told through my journey with my alcoholic father, or this is a story of resilience as told through blah, 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 blah. And it's the X that is the universal connection.
That
So
makes
I look for
perfect
the
sense.
Yes. So I look for the X. Is this a story about grief? Is this a story about love? Is this a story about curiosity? That's how I've been able to write books that fit into so many people's stories. You know, I always say I love when my stories become a part of yours. And that is my hope, is that someone is like, wow, this fits me. And then the next person's like, wait, it fits me too.
Oh,
And it's
that's,
because
yeah.
you're hitting the X, if you
Well,
will.
and I definitely think this book does that. And I do want to correct something for the listeners who know that sometimes, you know, I'm an old lady, so my mind goes in weird places. It was not Ann Patchett who held up a book. I was actually, you'll find this interesting, I'm a member of a circle. So,
Okay.
you know, we do the circle therapy where we talk about topics, and the leader of the circle
Yes.
held up a children's book and read it. It was just yesterday. That's how my mind is.
Oh.
But but it was a book written for children, but the message was to everyone in the circle. I think there were about 6 of us there yesterday. It really spoke to each of
Do you
us.
remember? Do you
No,
remember which
but
book it is?
the whole theme of the book was someone, a little character who has a name that could be girl or boy, Taylor, is afraid,
Okay.
and different little animals come up and they want to do different things. Like one animal wants to just punch the fear away, and when Taylor says no, then the animal leaves. And it culminates with a rabbit with really big ears coming up who just sits. And
Oh my
that's what
gosh.
Taylor wanted, was just to have someone sit with Taylor and hold a little space there. And then Taylor's able to work through the emotions of what's going on and decides how to handle the problem. So it's interesting because we see ourselves in each of those characters. Like I would be the animal
Really?
character who would come up and say, well, let's just punch somebody's lights out because we need to put a stop to this, you know. And so that, yeah,
That is exactly right.
yeah,
Yeah, and what I hear in what you're saying is this is a story of the importance of presence,
yes,
you know,
yes,
as told through these animals,
right.
which
Well,
is so great.
yeah, and I think the overarching lesson was, and I do this myself, and I bet that most people do, when I see someone in need, I want to give them what I think they need, what I think
Yeah.
they need,
Oh,
instead of
yes.
instead of wondering what do they feel they need. And yeah, and
Yes.
I know that
Which
you,
goes back
yeah, and
Which goes back to the witnessing concept.
That's right. That's right. And I know that
Yeah.
you, in the book, you mentioned the caregiving that you did for your parents, which was at a distance at some points. But I was a caregiver for my first husband who passed away. And so often people would try to interject themselves into my life story dealing with that and do the things that they thought that I needed. When really what I needed was someone to sit with him so I could go have my nails done, or someone to bring a meal, or someone to trim the shrubs, you know. And and there were a whole lot of people who patted themselves on the back by letting me know they were praying for me, you know, but they wouldn't actually come over and do anything. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. So a follow-up question though for you is, when you were talking about the X and the Y, and you were talking about the X will often be things that you're hearing a lot in the universe. Oh, Marianne, we're in a tough time right now. Tell me what you think you're hearing and what's your next book going to be about? What are you hearing in the universe?
Well, you know what? I think I wrote that book because I feel like we've been at this place for a bit of heightened everything. And I wrote a book last fall, or it came out last fall, and it's called The World is Awaiting You. And Target actually picked this as their picture book of the year in 2024,
Oh,
which was
wow.
amazing.
So what's the X? What's the X?
Well, the X is being a difference maker, is it's a book of encouragement that I was trying to answer the question of what is in this state of overwhelm that I feel of, oh my gosh, where do I even start? Where do I get involved? Who do I come alongside? And then it's like, it's too much. I'm going to shut down. So I was pondering this. I was like, what is one thing one person can do? Which led me to think about all the different ways we can do something with what we already have. And so the book took a traveling through our body parts of the world is awaiting your hands to wave and make and mend. Or the world is awaiting your mind to think and feel and know. This idea that you don't have to buy anything, you don't have to download anything, you have what you need to become a difference maker. And if your gift is boldness and speaking up, well, then the world's awaiting your voice. But if you're someone who's a little more quiet and maybe you're more comfortable writing letters, then the world is awaiting your hands to write letters.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, I love that so much because, I think that dealing with a lot of things that are going on right now, we see a lot of outrage, and what do we do about that? And each of us have, as you're saying, different things that we can do. Yeah. And I also hope that others will respect what other people can do. There's a lot of folks who want us all to be as outraged as they are. And if they're marching, we got to be marching with them, or we don't care. And that's not true. So I would love for people to respect what the world is awaiting from them, their gift area, but then also to respect that in others.
Oh, I think that's so important. Yeah. In fact, I opened this book here too. This is one of my favorites because it has a little ballot box.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, that was very intentional. So the world is awaiting your voice to speak and dance and sing. Okay, so speak, that's one way of using your voice, but putting on a show, is another way of having a voice.
Yes.
And then it says, cast your own vote, play your own note. What message will you bring?
Right.
What message will you bring that is you're passionate about? So this was my newest book that I put out, just of this idea of we are not helpless. We can do something, and don't let the bigness of the chaos stop us from choosing something that's aligned with our natural gifting. You don't have to go learn something new to do something.
That's so true. And for some reason, the vision that's coming in my head is that you can be a small person and walk out in front of a tank and stand there. If you remember that scene from China, you can be a tiny person and walk out in front of a tank and simply stand there. And what a powerful thing that turned out to be. So you can be a smart, determined, lovely, kind, gracious woman who has the guts to put her life story down in a book like you've done, and give us all the opportunity to see ourselves in different parts of the book. Just a couple of the passages that I noticed, I love the fact that you and your husband both really got into the caregiving for your parents so you could live that experience together, which I think changes people. Caregiving for someone else changes you. And when it's your parents, it's different. And certainly when it's a parent that has not given you the things that you need in life, but yet you feel this obligation. And I want to make sure my listeners know, if you're a person who has not stayed connected with family members because of mistreatment, there is no shame in that. That's your decision and that's your journey. But Marianne's was different, and she was there as she could be and was needed. And I love that. One of the scenes in the book that just grabbed me so hard, so hard, is when you had your daughter and your mother couldn't bother to be present. And again, as you said, all of the things that made her who she was were also there. So not excuses, but an explanation perhaps. But,
sure,
she calls your office and speaks to someone, and you ask, she didn't want to talk to me. And your employee says, no, she just wanted to know your baby's name so she can send a card. And that was hard to read, but based on what you and I have just talked about here, I think for her and her life experiences and what she had gone through, that might have been the best that she could have done in that moment.
Yeah, you're circling around that phrase that she loved so much, which was, I did the best I could with what I had. And then she would always add, under the circumstances. And she must have said that to me 500,000 times, I swear. And I was so bitter to hear that, because my mind was, well, it wasn't good enough. I'm glad you feel that way, but do you realize like the wake behind you, like the aftermath of this? And that's the piece that was perhaps one of the hardest, is that lack of any sort of repair, any kind of accountability, any kind of coming together to say, you know what, it was the best I could, and it wasn't enough for you.
Right, exactly. I agree. And
I see. Yeah. And sort of the cruel continuation of the storyline is that she lost her mind. She ended up with Alzheimer's dementia. She forgot everything, including who I was. So there wasn't ever that chance for her to ever have a change in perspective. And that is another interesting conversation point, is that choice of, do we come alongside somebody who we feel didn't do the same for us?
Right.
And to your point, if your choice is this, that's fine. And for me, I really struggled with that, of what to do. And yet I think then maybe that becomes like a values decision of, how do I want to look back on this time? Like, if I put myself 10 years in the future and I want to look back, how will I have wanted to go through that? I don't know. I'm not sure what the exact steps were for me to arrive at it. I just kind of felt sorry for both of them, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, and you did what you felt was right for you. And so, it's a life story that is your story. And I did care for someone, and I don't mean care for like in love, but do the physical caregiving for someone who had been very, very ugly to me. And I put myself in that position for 29 years till he passed away.
Oh.
And I said to a therapist at one point when I was in the midst of all this and he was still, this person I was caring for was still being abusive, I said, I'm trapped. And the therapist said, no, you're not. You have to reframe that. You made the decision to stay because you feel that you need to be there to be the caregiver and medical advocate, et cetera, for this person. So that was your decision. And, really, Marianne, once I got that in my head, I sort of let go of some of the resentment because I thought, yep, this was my decision. Nobody trapped me. Nobody forced me, put a gun to my head. I decided to do this, and I've done it because I personally, like you said, don't want to look back and feel like I abandoned someone, a fellow human who needed me. Again, not passing judgment on people who make different decisions, but you made the choice to care for your parents the way that you did when they likely, your mother certainly, the way I read it, she really didn't have any idea how dire her situation was and that you were stepping in and basically rescuing her at one point.
Right.
It's such a book full of the ups and downs of life. And whenever I read memoirs, no matter who it is, I start out by what I know of that person. And so what I know of the current Marianne, we've not known each other that long, but I think, oh, she's so pretty and smart and cute, and she's a good pickleball player, and she writes books. I love all this. She's an artist. This is so cool. And it's just like when I read Katharine Graham's biography, right? You think, oh, publisher of a big paper, she has everything, this big townhouse in Washington. And then you get into the life story and you realize, golly, Pete, man, she stood in Walmart line one day trying to figure out how to pay for groceries too. How about that? And you realize that very few people live just a straight line in life where it's just, they're born and man, success just follows them all the way. Most of us have these times when we get dirty and dust ourselves off and start over again.
Yeah. Well, thank you I couldn't agree more. And one thing that's popping in my mind from your story about when you were that caregiver and you had to make a choice, it is about the story you're telling yourself, isn't it? Because sometimes it's way more satisfying to tell the victim story.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I have to do this, and then resentment and bitterness and we feel justified. And and that isn't the only way to tell that story.
Right.
It's like, well, I am choosing this, and they didn't make me do this. I'm not a victim right now. And that was one thing that therapist told me. She said something about, I noticed that with my husband, she said, I noticed you're really good at like telling the victim story and giving your power away, like for him to make a decision. So you give your power away, you give him the decision-making power. Well, then when it doesn't go well, now you're like pissed off and resentful.
Yes.
And you were the one who gave the power away in the beginning.
Right.
And I was like, you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
Point.
Yeah, and I'm not currently in therapy, except I do have my circle group though when we get together once a month, and that's
a circle group idea.
It's wonderful. But I highly recommend it for people because you do learn a lot about yourself. Well, I know we got to wrap up because you've got another appointment, but geez, this has been so interesting. And I'm telling you, folks, you need to get this book, men and women alike, because, you write a lot of things about your husband and your brother and your father, and it's just a wonderful life story that will affect all of us. And I hope that it makes people realize, first of all, that the fabulously successful woman you are now didn't just happen overnight. There's been a lot of ups and downs, but then also, we need to really learn to respect children and what they're telling us and what their needs are. And we also, all of us need to learn to stand up to doctors, whom I know a lot of them are fabulous. I know and love fabulous physicians, have some in the family. But oftentimes, because they're under a lot of pressure these days to see one patient after another very quickly, et cetera, we don't feel heard, but we have a right to be heard in that arena. And I hope that people will take some of that from the book. There's just so many life lessons here, and your willingness to share them openly with us is so important. So I'm going to hold it up again so everyone can see. And you can order this. You can get it at your local bookseller, which I recommend. Is it on Audible yet? Have you done Audible?
It is.
Fabulous.
It is. There's an audiobook. There's also a reader's guide in the book.
Yes.
So if anyone wants to use it as a book club type read, I do have questions that I came up with.
You do. And I love those. I love those.
And I'm always willing to pop in to a book club, whether virtually or like tonight, my girlfriend is having one around this book. And so I'm going over there to be part of the book club.
Oh, how fun.
That'll be fun.
How fun. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us on Blue Lift. Appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate it very much. Yeah. Listeners, if you enjoyed this, let me know. And I would also love it if you would, like and share the episode, all that stuff. I always forget to do that. My producer reminds me because, I'm just into this just to talk to interesting people. So thank you again, Marianne Richmond. You're a real gift to the world. And I'm glad that you have brought us all of the things that you have to bring to us. So thank you and have a fabulous day.
Thank you. You as well.